Today, I want to share with you the 5 secrets all ultra runners need to know. Growing up, the only running you would see me doing was either on the soccer field or playing with my friends. I didn't really have any desire to run for fun. I was definitely not thinking about running marathons, and back in the 90s, ultra running was super, super rare. Now, even though ultra running has gone mainstream, there are way more marathon runners out there than ultra runners. This brings me to the first secret all ultra runners need to know. If you truly want to run it, you will run it. If you don't, you won't. What do I mean by this? Well, over the last year, I've had a couple different health challenges come about. Back in April 2024, I actually lost vision in my right eye. I went from being able to see 100% out of my eye to nothing. Now, today, I can see almost 100%. But what this did is this caused me to go through tons of medical testing because this is not a normal thing. People lose vision when they have migraines. There's different reasons to lose vision, but this was literally 100% vision to zero like that. So when my vision didn't come back within an hour of this happening, I knew it was something more serious. So I immediately went to see my optometrist. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I wear glasses. And I've gone to an optometrist since 4th grade. So I was just like, okay, something going on with my vision. I should probably go there. So I went, and they actually did a very good job of helping me out. They ran some tests, and they ultimately told me to go see an ophthalmologist. They told me that something was going on in my retina, so the back of my eye. And they sent me to a retinal specialist who is an ophthalmologist nearby. So I went to go see him. And ultimately, where all this went is I got diagnosed with something called a CRVO, a central retinal vein occlusion. This basically is a blood clot that has formed in my retina, in a vein blocking off blood flow. And what that basically did is it caused my vision in the middle, the center of my eye, to go away. And when it first happened, I couldn't see at all. And now today, I'm almost 100%. And I promise you, I am going to get to 100% vision. Well, what causes a blood clot in the eye? At that time, I had my ophthalmologist, my optometrist, and I ended up going to see a couple medical doctors as well. And they were all worried that maybe I had some sort of cardiovascular issue. I started doing multiple tests on my cardiovascular system. Now, I'm an ultra runner, so I wasn't too worried. I'm like, I ran 50 miles 6 months ago. I'm pretty sure that my cardiovascular system is fine. I also embrace the 3 pillars of healthy living that I teach in my healthy living guide: movement, tracking, and accountability. And the tracking I do, I eat very healthy. Well, test after test after test. I did a ton of different blood tests, testing different markers. I did an ultrasound on different arteries and veins. And then I did something where they stuck a camera down my throat to take pictures of my heart. Well, all the tests came out normal until we did this test taking pictures of my heart. Before I even went in to take this test, I was in the prep area and I was talking to one of the doctors. He asked me what kind of running I do. I shared that I'm an ultra runner. He asked where I was from, and I said, I'm from Colorado. And I told him that I'm an ultra runner, and we really hit it off. And he told me he was a marathon runner. And I asked, wow, man, that's awesome. What's your time? I've ran multiple marathons, and I'm a pretty slow marathon runner. My marathon time, my best time, is just over 4 hours, about 4 hours and 15 minutes. And he was like, me and my wife are into it, and I've ran a 3-hour marathon before. And I'm like, great. Are you going to do an ultra? And that's when I realized this first secret. He's like, no, man, I don't see the point. I have no desire to do it. I am used to doing marathons. I can run a 3-hour marathon, but doing an ultra is just something that's not even on my radar. So I pushed him even further. I was like, well, what about a 50K? A 50K is only 5 more miles than a marathon. And he's like, I can't wrap my head around the training. And, I live here in Chicago and there's not many trails around here. So I'm usually running on roads. So yeah, I can't even wrap my head around doing an ultra. And to me, I'm just like, okay, you're running a 3-hour marathon. You can run an ultra. You can run a 50K ultra. You could do a 50-mile ultra. All you need to do is get the miles in. But he didn't even seem like he liked the idea of doing an ultra. And he was a little bit worried about me and the type of mileage and running that I was doing. I was telling him, hey, I'm going to be running 100 miles a week. And as I get to my peak weeks for this 100K run that I'm running. And he just seemed really in disbelief. So after the exam, I was in the recovery room waiting to get discharged. He comes out and tells me, hey, Johnny, so we went in there and it looks like you have a hole in your heart. So you're probably not going to be running your ultra in September. This is like 3 months after this test. And really, I don't know if you should be running ultras ever again. Well, my initial reaction, because I was still kind of coming out of surgery, they gave me some medicine to kind of knock me out while they did the exam. So I didn't really know how to respond. So I was like, oh, yeah, I bet I'm fine. Now, within a week, I had talked to a couple other doctors and I ended up getting cleared. They were at one point talking about filling the hole in my heart, putting like a patch basically. But what we ended up doing is nothing. Evidently, 20% of people end up having a hole in their heart, and most people don't even find out that they have one unless they're doing a test for something else. Since I was doing a test to figure out what was going on with my eye, that's the only reason why we found it. And at first, one of the doctors thought there was a correlation. Well, ultimately, we found out there was not a correlation between the hole in my heart and what happened with my eye. So I ended up getting cleared to not only run ultras again, but to run my 100K race in September. Well, one thing that's been rattling around in my head since I did this test and met this guy was, if you truly want it, you will run it. And if you don't, you won't. And you'll make every excuse in the book why you not only aren't going to run it, but someone else also isn't going to run it. So if you are going to be an ultra runner, this may be the biggest secret. If you want it, you will run it. And if you don't, you won't. And be prepared for other people to tell you that you shouldn't be doing. So what's the biggest difference between an ultra and a marathon? Well, in my opinion, you can run a marathon without training and you can finish it. Because marathons at this point are extremely mainstream. It's kind of the starting point when you get to ultra running. And the reality is, from a physiological standpoint, a marathon is very different from a 50K and a 50-mile race and beyond. You would think, okay, a 50-mile race is just 2 marathons. So just think about how tired you are after a marathon and double it. But that's not the case, you see. Every mile that you tack on top of a marathon is not linearly harder. It's exponentially harder. So a double marathon, a 50-mile run, is not twice as hard. It is exponentially harder than a marathon. The compounding effect on your body isn't linear. So this is why when people look at 50Ks and 50-mile runs, they're in the right. You are in the right in thinking, oh, you know what? I do marathons, but that's where I stop. They're physiologically correct. So when you do start training for these longer runs, just know that your body needs to physiologically change, which is why it can take months, years to build up your base miles to feel good after these races. The first time I ran a 50-mile race, I not only didn't want to run an ultra again, I didn't even want to run a marathon again. That's how bad I felt. Then a few months ago, I ran a 100K race, and I ran it much faster than I ran my 50-mile race, and I felt fine. It's because I had 2,500 more miles under my belt, and I had ran a 50-mile race before. Another thing that supports this big difference between a marathon and ultras is, did you know that the best professional runners in the world don't run ultras? Why? Well, there's significantly more money in running marathons than ultras. Now, this is slowly changing, but there are professional marathoners all over the world that support their families by running marathons because they get paid for it. This is talked about in detail in the book, The Rise of the Ultra Runner, and why the best marathoners in the world don't actually like to run ultras. They did multiple experiments that they talk about in the book, how they took professional marathon runners and had them tackle the top ultra marathons in the world. And in numerous cases, the runners stopped. Not because they couldn't physically do it, but mentally they got in their heads. They said, you know what? My foot hurts. It's not in a lot of pain, but it's starting to hurt. I don't want to get injured because my family is relying on me to do this. And even if I win this race, I'm going to make significantly less money than I do running marathons all over the world. So this is a real thing. There is a boundary that exists between a marathon runner and an ultra marathon runner. And really, it comes down to this one secret. If you truly want it, you will run it. If you don't, you won't. And this brings me to the second secret. Forward is a pace. I learned this when I first started climbing 14,000-foot mountains. Now, I have asthma, so I had to, like anything I do, all the ultra running I've done, playing soccer when I was a kid, I've always used the concept of progressive overload to increase my cardiovascular aptitude for these specific activities. Okay. So when I first started hiking 14,000-foot mountains, I was in really good shape, but I wasn't in 14,000-foot mountain shape yet. Main reason is because the higher above sea level you go, the less oxygen there is in the air and the more red blood cells you need in order to adapt and bring oxygen to your body the higher you go. Well, when you have asthma, the effects are even stronger, okay? So when I first started hiking 14ers, I was humbled by how hard it was, even based on how good a shape I was with all the soccer and yoga sculpt that I've done over the years. Yoga sculpt being a combination of yoga and high intensity interval training. So what I learned though, as I did 14,000-foot peaks and I started to get faster, is the people that got to the top and finished the hikes first weren't the same people going the fastest. Let me say that again. Just by mere speed alone, just because you are the fastest marathon runner in the world, doesn't mean that you can even finish an ultra race. It's interesting, isn't it? What I ended up learning is the people that got to the top of the 14,000-foot mountains first were those who kept going. For me, I would push really hard and then I'd have to stop, catch my breath, manage my asthma, and then keep going. And that's how I did it for a long time until I learned this. And I learned this from a father and son who had climbed every single 14er in Colorado. So in Colorado, there's somewhere between 52 and 58 14,000-foot peaks, depending on which list you look at. And they shared their secret with me. It's like, hey guys, you passed me on the way up and I never caught you. Can you tell me your secret? And they're like, what's your name? I'm like, I'm Johnny. They're like, Johnny, the secret is keep moving. So instead of going quickly, then stopping, catching your breath, refueling, and then going again, just keep going. Just move slower. And I'm like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense because I feel like every time I refuel, I'm like there for like 3 to 5 minutes. And then I push again, I got to stop. So yeah, maybe mathematically, by just as long as I keep moving, I'll be good. Well, I combine that with during COVID, I really got into riding the Peloton. And I specifically got into following the trainer, Robin Arzon, who is an amazing marathon runner and ultra endurance athlete. I think she focuses on marathons more than ultras, but she's done her fair share of ultras. Well, what she says in almost every single one of her classes on the Peloton is forward is a pace. As long as you keep moving forward, you're going to get there. And this is a secret that I live by in ultra running. First marathon I ever ran, I was injured 16 miles in. I had excruciating pain shooting down my left leg. And I told myself at that moment, I could stop right now, or I could keep moving forward and I will ultimately get to my 26.2 mile finish line. Now, this was a self-made marathon, so I didn't have a time limit or anything. I was just running 26.2 miles on trails. And even though I was in pain, I ended up walking the next 9 miles. I ran a little bit here and there. And then I ran the last mile of the marathon and finished the race. It took me 6.5 hours. It's my worst marathon time ever. But I finished, and I taught my brain that I can do this. And that really set the foundation for everything I've done since. Because I made that choice that forward is a pace, I'm just going to keep moving. Another example, in my 100K race this past year, at mile 37, my left hamstring completely seized up. I was not taking in enough electrolytes, enough salt. I was feeling really well. My calories and carb intake was very good. My water intake was very good, but my electrolyte and salt intake was real bad. And I swear I could barely walk. But what did I do? Forward is a pace. So I kept walking. I was kind of rubbing out the area. And eventually I got to a point after walking for about a quarter mile that I could start jogging again. And I got to the aid station. I fueled up with salt and I kept going. And then I just kept making sure that I was drinking enough water, getting enough calories and carbs, and getting enough salt. And I ended up winning the race. But forward is a pace. So you can even have instances like that. Forward is a pace, even if you have to walk. Okay, I talk in other shows and other videos about how the walk-run technique is one of the best techniques to become an ultra runner. Because as long as you keep moving forward, forward is a pace, you will finish. And ultra running, especially when you first get into it, is really about finishing the mileage. It's about hitting the mile marker. Then the next time you do it, you can worry about setting a personal best and even placing. Okay. But forward is a pace. My third secret that all ultra runners need to know is to manage your energy output by watching your pace versus your heart rate. Okay. So I ran 100 kilometers in 12 hours. This ends up being somewhere around an 11.5 minute mile, including breaks. A year prior, I ran 50 miles in 13 hours. That is a lot slower than 100 kilometers in 12 hours. Well, after doing my 100K race and winning it, I told myself, you know what? I'm going to start pushing pace. Yes, I was doing an 11 and a half minute mile on average with my stops and refueling breaks. But I'm like, I want to start training closer to an 8-minute mile. And I want to start doing 8-minute miles for half marathons. Typically, when I'm running an ultra, my pace, not including breaks, is somewhere between a 9.5 minute and 10.5 minute mile. Yeah, breaks, that's how we get up to that 11.5 minute mile. What I'm working on now is going from that 9.5 minute mile down to an 8-minute mile. What does this mean from an energy output perspective? For me, at a 9.5 to 10.5 minute mile, my energy output ends up being somewhere between 130 and 150 beats per minute. That ends up keeping me in zone 2 for my heart rate. Now, for those of you that don't know very much about heart rate zones, there's multiple different ways to do this, but there's really anywhere between 5 and 7 heart rate zones. Peloton teaches 7, and I've heard 5 zones taught more broadly. Well, zone 1 is your all-day pace. So your heart rate is at a level that you can maintain all day. Zone 2 is a little bit faster. This is kind of your fat burning pace. It's faster than your zone 1. It also is kind of close to an all-day pace. You're going to need a lot of fuel. You're going to get more tired. You're going to be starting to use fat as your fuel source if you're not continuing to take in calories. Zone 3, we start getting close to the anaerobic zones. Aerobic means with oxygen, anaerobic means without oxygen. Well, once we get to anaerobic, it basically means that your body isn't getting enough oxygen to fuel itself. When we're aerobic, your body is still getting enough oxygen to fuel itself, and you're not going to have very much lactic acid buildup. But once you get to anaerobic, that's where lactic acid starts occurring, and your body just isn't as efficient with its energy output. Okay. So for ultra running, we really don't ever want to go into the anaerobic stage of energy production until maybe the last mile or couple miles of the race. If you want to work up to these faster paces, what you need to do is train your body to have a lower heart rate at the faster pace. For me, my zone 2, which is where you want to do most of your miles, and in a race, you're probably going to be zone 2 climbing to zone 3. You're not going to want to go into zone 4 or 5 until that last bit if you still have the energy for it. But what you really want to do is stay in zone 2. So for me, 130 beats per minute, 140 beats per minute, that's really where I want to be. Okay. And right now, my pace is about a 9.5 minute to 10.5 minute pace to maintain that heart rate. Well, 1 week after my 100K race, I decided, you know what? I'm going to go out, I'm going to run 12 miles, and I'm going to push for an 8-minute pace. Well, I didn't bring any fuel with me because I'm like, you know what? I've done 20-mile runs without fuel before because I like to train undernourished a lot of the time. Okay. When I'm actually doing a race, I never do that. I always have 200 to 500 calories per hour when I'm racing. I make sure I have plenty of fuel. But when I take runs, especially shorter runs, and for me, a shorter run is anything under 15 miles at this point, I'm not necessarily going to bring fuel with me. Well, I do not recommend doing this if you're running a pace that you never ran before. And really, you should always have fuel with you because why not? You don't have to eat it. But at the very least, you may as well bring something like the Scratch gummies or the Scratch chews, which I'll talk about further a little later on. Well, at an 8-minute pace, my heart rate jumped up to 160 beats per minute. Okay. And when I was going uphill, even closer to 170. What does that mean? That means that my body is working a lot harder. My heart is working a lot harder. My body is being less efficient with energy. It's burning calories faster. It's burning up my energy reserves. And I personally have not trained my body to use fat as a viable energy source as much as other people have. Okay. So I got to a point 9 miles in because I wasn't fueling myself. 9 miles in, I hit the biggest wall that I ever have at that distance. I never bonked this bad 9 miles into a run, at least since I've become an ultra runner. Maybe the first time I ran 9 miles, it was really tough, but 9 miles is nothing when I run 62 miles for races now. So what ended up happening is since I didn't eat any calories and I didn't really build myself up to a point where I could run mile 9 at an 8 to 8.5 minute pace, because I'm used to doing 9.5 to 10.5 minute pace, which this is literally a 1 to 2 minute pace faster than what my body's used to. So I completely burned out. And if I hadn't already built my mental skill of getting through these walls, I probably would have given up. But I knew I was 3 miles from my house and I knew I could get there. So I dropped to about an 11-minute pace and I got all the way home. I could not hold an 8 to 8.5 minute pace. That's why this is so important. As you become an ultra runner, you will see that it takes lots of time to build endurance. It takes lots of time to build up mileage. It can take months, it can take years. Okay. But even though you're building up mileage, even though you can run 50 miles and feel fine the next day, doesn't mean that you can run 50 miles at an 8-minute pace. It doesn't mean that you can run a half marathon at an 8-minute pace or a faster pace for you. So what you need to do is, instead of doing what I did, which was, okay, I'm all of a sudden going to go from running 9.5 to 10.5 minute mile pace, and I'm all of a sudden going to go down to an 8.5 minute mile pace and see kind of how it goes. What you need to do is work up to it. So another thing I've been doing is in shorter runs, like a 5 mile run, I've been playing with a 7 minute and even lower pace. But I'm not doing it the whole time. I'll run a 7 minute or lower pace, or a sub 7 minute pace, and then I'll go back up to where I feel comfortable, around 9.5 to 10.5 minute mile pace. It's interval training. So just know that as you become an ultra runner, manage your heart rate, find the heart rate that works really well for you. For me, it's 130 to 140 beats per minute. I hold that. I can run that pace for 12 hours. But you have to manage your energy. So it's not just about eating enough, it's about managing your energy output. And you do that with pace versus heart rate. Now, my fourth secret that all ultra runners need to know does have to do with fueling. It does have to do with eating. I think it goes without saying that you need to eat a lot when you are running an ultra marathon. When you are running a marathon, you need to eat a lot. When you're running a half marathon, you need to make sure you're getting enough energy in you so you can hold that really fast pace. Well, when you're running 50K, 50 mile, 100K, 100 mile and beyond, you need to literally make eating your full-time job during that run. You're not just running, you're eating. The problem is, at some point, you're not going to want to eat anymore. It may be that your stomach can't handle it. It may be that you can't swallow anymore. It may be what happens to me where I can't chew anymore. During my first 50-mile run, I was so tired of chewing because I was chewing pretzels and eating with hummus all day. Maybe pretzels wasn't the right thing to eat. Since then, I no longer go to pretzels as my go-to fuel source all day. Pretzels are still nice to have at some point throughout the day because you got carbs and salt all in one. But at some point, you're not going to want to eat, but you need to eat. So the secret here is, how do you make sure that you are continuously getting fuel, getting the calories you need, the recommended amount being between 200 and 500 calories per hour, and somewhere around 60 grams of carbs per hour? How do you make sure you're getting that without actually having to eat? Well, this past year, while training for my 100K race, this was one of the problems I was trying to solve. Then I eventually figured out I was advised by my running coach at Run Infinite that I needed to get my fuel through my liquids, through my water, through my Camelback. Okay. I always bring my own Camelback for ultras. I don't rely on just water bottles or what they provide. I always bring my own Camelback and my own nutrition in general because I have a lot of allergies. And as an athlete with asthma, allergies can really throw off my system. Well, I was used to bringing my own Camelback, and I'm used to putting, my hydrator in there. I use Liquid IV, which I have linked in the show notes and the description below the YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube. And I'm used to bringing gummies like the Scratch Chews, okay? Scratch Energy Chews, which I also highly recommend, and I have linked in the show notes and in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. Well, what I had never heard of was something called a super carb hydrating powder. This is a super high carb hydrating powder. In a serving, you have 400 calories. So what I learned is I could take this powder and put 400 to 500 calories in my Camelback, and then in between laps, because it was a 5-lap course, I would swap out Camelbacks and have another 400 to 500 calories of just this in my Camelback. And then I have another 2 or 3 of these, which the liquid IVs have about 45 calories each in my Camelback. And then I also learned that liquid IV does not have enough salt for me because I sweat so darn much in these races that I actually need to add salt tablets or salt packets separate. But the key here is I knew from experience that at some point I wasn't going to be able to chew. Well, it happened differently in my 100K race. About a marathon in, I no longer even could stomach the thought of food. Okay. My chewing was actually fine. My stomach was acting up though. I couldn't get myself to swallow and get solid foods into my stomach. So I kept doing gummies. I was able to get gummies in, and these gummy packs have about 160 calories a pack. So I was just like putting them in, chewing what I could, and squirting them down with my water, which had all this super high carb powder in it. But the super high carb powder made it so I didn't have to worry about eating as much. And especially when I got to the final lap, I had enough calories in my system that eating was just kind of a bonus at that point. Before my last lap, I actually ate 2 pears, and then I brought a pear with me because fruit was actually going down really well. But by having your calories in liquid form, you take the pressure off of yourself to always be thinking about, well, when do I need to eat next? A lot of very serious ultra runners will actually set timers on their watch or on their phone to remind them to eat every 30 minutes or to remind them to eat every hour. I've tried this, it just doesn't work very well for me. I rather just eat when I want or when I think about it. My rule is if you think about eating, you eat. And then mixing that with having powder, having your calories in your Camelback is a game changer. This not only helped me fuel for my entire 100K race and gave me enough fuel so that the next day I actually felt fine versus when I ran my 50-mile race a year prior, I was crawling around the next day and felt terrible. I also won the race. I had enough fuel and I was hitting my fuel markers so well throughout the race that I won the race. And the last mile and a half, I ran a sub 7-minute mile after already running 60 miles. And that brings me to my 5th secret all ultra runners need to know: hydration, electrolytes, and salt. Okay. I think it goes without saying that you need to drink a lot of water. And the hotter it is outside, the more water you need to drink. I also think it goes without saying that you need to have some sort of electrolyte mix in your water. Because yes, you can get away with a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, and maybe you can even get away with a full marathon without having something like this. You will not get away with an ultra without electrolytes. At some point, your body is going to be so depleted, it will literally shut down if you're not giving it the vitamins, the minerals, the electrolytes, the salt, the fuel that you need. Yes, you can mentally push through it. And if you read books like Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins or Never Finished by David Goggins, he is the king of pushing through. But even David Goggins, once he realized how terrible he felt not having the right nutrition, after doing a couple of these races, he always has the right nutrition. Just because the first couple ultras that he did, he was not prepared with the right fuel, doesn't mean that that's what he should have done. He is the first to admit that he did not fuel properly. He still finished because he's one of the most mentally strong endurance athletes in the world, but your body needs the right fuel. It needs the right hydration. So for my 100K race, I already told you what happened on mile 37. Okay. I had all of this going on. I had my super high carb powder. I had my gummies. My significant other made me cheeseless pizza because cheese for me creates a lot of inflammation in my body. She made homemade bread. I had different sandwiches, a hummus sandwich, a sun butter sandwich. I had a butter sandwich prepared. I even had these chocolate muffins that I really like prepared. I had all this prepared. And she was putting 2 to 3 of these in every single Camelback that I had. So I was getting plenty of electrolytes, I thought. And then at mile 37, I cramped up. And it's because I wasn't getting enough salt. I was sweating like crazy. I think I had drank like 14 liters of water at that point. And even though I was drinking enough water, my body wasn't holding on to it because I didn't have enough salt. So just know that it's not enough to assume that just because you're buying electrolytes, and by the way, I still love the liquid IV electrolytes. They go down really well for me. Just because you have the powders doesn't mean that you're getting everything that you and your body needs. Everyone's body's different, which is why even though I link to the fuel that I use in the show notes and on the description, if you were watching this on YouTube, it doesn't mean that this stuff will work for you. You need to experiment and you need to know that at some point you're probably not going to get enough salt. I thought, hey, I'm covered. People talk about salt tablets, all this stuff. I've been doing this for like 4 years now. I'd never had a problem. And mile 37, I had a problem. And now you will never see me do a run that is longer than a marathon without salt. I know I can finish a marathon with my liquid IV electrolytes and my scratch super high carb powder. But you know what? I'm even going to start using salt for marathon. So I also have a link in the description for some Himalayan pink salt. But really, any type of salt will do for your runs. Now, the last thing that I learned as I got into running is that even though people tell you that if you're running marathons, if you're running ultras, you should always be eating, this advice isn't always correct. Before I got into running, I weighed somewhere around 170 pounds. I got into running, I ran my first marathon, ran it in 6.5 hours. Then I ran my second marathon and I ran it in 4.5 hours. Then I got to my third marathon. It was about 9 months to a year after my second marathon. I had been training, I'd been eating like crazy because people were telling me to do that. And I was eating healthy too. I was eating homemade meals cooked by my amazing significant other. And whenever we go to my parents' house on the weekends, my mom cooks and my mom's a nutritionist. The food was really high quality. But when I ran my third marathon, my time dropped. I went from running a 4.5 hour marathon to running a 5 hour marathon. In addition, because you're probably wondering, well, maybe it was harder terrain. Well, the terrain was actually easier. When I ran my 6.5 hour marathon and my 4.5 hour marathon, I did that a mile above sea level in Denver, Colorado. When I ran my 5 hour marathon, I was at sea level. Okay, I was in Hawaii at sea level. Very little vertical feet gained during that run versus the marathons I did back in Colorado. So my marathon time dropped by 30 minutes. I was devastated at the end of this run. And at the time, I wasn't aware that I actually had put on significant weight. When I got back to Colorado, I went to my yearly physical and they weighed me, and I weighed close to 200 pounds. Almost 30 pounds more than what I weighed when I first got into running. It's crazy. But this is not an isolated occurrence. I've heard many people who have gone into running or working out actually gaining weight because we're told eat, 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 eat. Well, today I weigh 155 pounds and I'm still able to eat whatever I want. Yes, I do indulge in Costco hot dogs and ice cream from Costco every now and again. And sometimes I even go to Culver's and get cheese curds and the Curder Burger when it comes on the menu once a year. Now, how have I been able to do this? Well, I created what I call the 3 pillars of healthy living. Pillar number one is movement. Running is movement. Pillar number two is tracking. That's actually tracking your caloric intake. Remember, we talked about one of the secrets today? Tracking your energy output. Okay, so tracking is huge. You need to actually know how many calories you're taking in and how many calories you are burning. And then number three is accountability. Accountability really holds all 3 pillars together. Well, I have a gift for you, and it is my healthy living guide where I go through these 3 pillars of healthy living and help you integrate them into your life today. It's only a 3 minute or less read, and I guarantee you that you will be able to at least integrate one of the 3 pillars into your life immediately. And because I want you to have access to this guide right now, I have it linked in the show notes, and it is also linked in the description if you are watching this video on YouTube. Thanks for listening and watching if you're on YouTube. I'll see you in the next one.